What happens when paradise hides a nightmare? In May 2005, Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old honor student from Alabama, boarded a plane with her classmates, ready for the trip of a lifetime to Aruba. A week later, she was gone. No trace, no goodbye, just a mystery that would haunt two nations and reshape how we see safety, privilege, and justice. This is not only a story of a missing girl, it's a story about what lies beneath paradise. Welcome to Natalee Holloway Lies Beneath the Sun of Aruba. For Natalee Holloway, May 2005 marked the end of one chapter and the thrilling beginning of another. She was 18, bright, ambitious, and days away from graduating from Mountain Brook High School in Birmingham, Alabama. Her future was set. She had a full scholarship to the University of Alabama, where she planned to study pre-medicine. Before college, however, came one last celebration, the senior trip to Aruba, a tradition for her high school. 124 students, accompanied by 7 adult chaperones, flew to the Caribbean island for 5 days of sun, beaches, and freedom. To Natalee, it was supposed to be pure joy. Her mother, Beth Holloway, remembered her daughter's excitement as she packed her suitcase, flip-flops, swimsuits, and the white dress she planned to wear for the group's farewell dinner. It would be the last time Beth saw her daughter. The group stayed at the Holiday Inn Resort, a beachfront hotel near Palm Beach, surrounded by the turquoise waters and nightclubs that made Aruba a playground for tourists. Students spent their days snorkeling, riding jeeps through the desert dunes, and dancing long after midnight. For many, it was their first taste of independence, and with it, the first taste of danger. On the island, American students often mixed with locals and tourists alike, especially at a popular club called Carlos and Charlie's. That's where Natalee was last seen alive. On the night of May 29, 2005, witnesses recalled Natalee laughing, dancing, and drinking with friends. She was carefree, radiant, and by 1 a.m., she was seen leaving the club with 3 young men, Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old Dutch honors student living in Aruba, and 2 brothers, Deepak and Satish Kalpo, local residents. When her friends gathered in the hotel lobby the next morning to board their return flight home, Natalee didn't appear. Her bed hadn't been slept in. Her luggage was still in her room. At first, panic gave way to disbelief. Maybe she overslept. Maybe she went out early. But by midday, dread took over. Beth Holloway received a call no parent ever expects. Natalee didn't come back to the hotel last night. Within hours, Beth and her husband, Dave Holloway, were on a plane to Aruba. When they landed, Beth went straight to the police station. "My daughter is missing," she said, but the response she got wasn't urgency. It was hesitation. Aruban police told her not to worry. "Girls go missing after parties," they said. "She'll come back." But Beth knew her daughter, and she knew something was terribly wrong. As the Caribbean sun rose over the pristine beaches, a new shadow began to spread. Paradise had turned into the scene of a nightmare. The final night of Natalee Holloway's life began like any other. Warm, electric, and full of promise. It was Sunday, May 29, 2005, the group's last evening before flying home to Alabama. Students gathered in the hotel lobby for photos and laughter. Natalee wore a denim skirt and a multicolored top, casual, bright, effortlessly confident. The plan was simple: celebrate one last night in Aruba at Carlos and Charlie's, the island's most famous bar. Inside, the music pulsed with reggaeton and pop. Drinks flowed freely, even for underage tourists. Locals mixed with American students, and everyone was dancing. Among the crowd, Natalee caught the attention of a tall Dutch teenager with sharp features and a smooth charm, Joran van der Sloot. At just 17, Joran was already known around town. He was the son of a respected Dutch judge in training and lived nearby with his parents. To tourists, he seemed mature, polite, even trustworthy. To locals, he was something else entirely, a manipulator with a taste for danger. Witnesses later said Joran had spent nights at the club before, often targeting young female tourists. He was charismatic, confident, and always had a plan. As the night went on, Joran and Natalee were seen dancing, laughing and sharing drinks. Friends remembered her as happy, maybe a little tipsy, but fine. At 1:30 a.m., Natalee told her friends she was leaving, with Joran and two other men, Deepak and Satish Kalpo. They were seen getting into Deepak's silver Honda Civic. That was the last confirmed sighting of Natalee Holloway. The men later told police they drove Natalee to the Holiday Inn, where she got out on her own and walked toward the lobby. But no security footage ever confirmed it. No hotel staff saw her. No friend did either. Joran's story shifted with every interview. At first, he said they dropped her off. Then he claimed she wanted to see the ocean, so they drove her to Arashi Beach, a secluded area far from the resort lights. Then he said he left her there, alone. Later he claimed she fainted on the beach and he panicked. Every lie built a fog that hid the truth, and with each version, the window of hope grew smaller. Back at the hotel, Natalee's classmates were preparing to leave the island. When they realized she hadn't come back, panic spread through the group. One friend called her phone. No answer. Another checked her room. Her passport, clothes and luggage were all there. Everything except Natalee. By sunrise, her parents were already en route to Aruba. Beth Holloway landed on the island before noon, and before even checking into a hotel, she drove straight to Joran's house. When he opened the door, she looked him in the eyes and said, "I know you were the last person to see my daughter alive." It was the beginning of a battle, not just against a suspect, but against a system that would protect him. When Beth Holloway stepped off the plane in Aruba, she carried nothing but a photograph of her daughter and a determination stronger than fear. It was May 30th, 2005, less than 24 hours since Natalee was last seen. But Beth already sensed the clock was working against her. She wasn't just fighting time, she was fighting indifference. From the moment she arrived, she could feel it, a strange calm on an island that should have been panicking. At the local police station, officers told her to wait. "Missing persons usually show up after a night out," they said. "She's probably with friends." But Beth knew Natalee. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. Something was wrong. Beth didn't wait. Within hours, she was knocking on doors, passing out flyers, and interviewing anyone who had seen her daughter. Her first stop, Joran van der Sloot's house. Alongside her friend and local volunteers, she confronted him directly. "Where is Natalee?" Joran looked nervous but composed. He told Beth the same story he told police, that he dropped Natalee off at the Holiday Inn and watched her walk away. But Beth noticed details didn't match. He hesitated when she pressed him. He wouldn't look her in the eye. By that evening, the story had already reached the United States. CNN and Fox News broke the story of the missing American teen in Aruba. Within days, Natalee's photo, smiling under the Caribbean sun, was everywhere. Aruban authorities were now under global pressure. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Locals, police, even tourists combing beaches and bushes. Helicopters circled the island. Divers scanned coral reefs and shipwrecks, but there was no sign of Natalee. Meanwhile, inconsistencies began to surface. Police discovered that Joran and the Kalpo brothers had lied in their initial statements. Phone records showed they hadn't dropped her at the hotel. They'd gone somewhere else. But where? Joran's story began to twist. He claimed they took Natalee to the beach, that she fell asleep in the sand. Then he said she wanted to see the sharks. Then that he left her there, alive. Beth Holloway refused to believe it. "He knows what happened," she told reporters. "He's playing games while my daughter's out there." The media turned the search into a spectacle. Cameras followed every dig, every rumor, every theory. And under that spotlight, the truth seemed to shrink. As the days became weeks, Beth's mission transformed from a search into a crusade. She wasn't just looking for her daughter anymore. She was fighting a system that valued tourism over truth. Aruba's government feared economic collapse. Hotels whispered that the missing girl headlines were bad for business. But Beth didn't care. She stood in front of every camera, repeating her daughter's name, demanding accountability. "This isn't about tourism," she said. "This is about a girl who never came home." And from that moment, Beth Holloway became more than a grieving mother. She became a force, relentless, defiant and unyielding, the voice Natalee no longer had. The island of Aruba was no longer a paradise. It was a stage, and everyone was watching. By June 2005, the investigation into Natalee Holloway's disappearance had become the most publicized case in the Caribbean's history. Hundreds of journalists filled the small island. Every rumor became a headline, every lead a promise. And at the center of it all were three young men, Joran van der Sloot and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpoe. The pressure to act was immense. Under growing international outrage, Aruban police finally made their first arrests. On June 9th, Joran and the Kalpoes were taken into custody for questioning. The world waited for the confession that everyone thought was coming. At first, they denied everything, but as interrogations continued, cracks appeared. Joran's story changed again. This time, he claimed Natalee had fallen unconscious on the beach and that he and Deepak panicked, leaving her there. When asked why they didn't call for help, Joran said, "We were scared. We didn't know what to do." The Kalpoe brothers gave conflicting versions of their own. Deepak insisted he dropped Joran and Natalee at the beach. Satish said they never went near the water. Each time police pressed them, the timeline shifted. The media called it the web of lies. But without physical evidence, no body, no witnesses, no crime scene, prosecutors had nothing solid. Then came what seemed like a breakthrough. Police dogs indicated human scent near the beach. Divers discovered bone fragments offshore. For a brief moment, it felt like the truth was within reach. But tests showed the bones weren't human. As days turned into weeks, Joran's arrogance began to show. In interviews, he smirked. He called Beth Holloway emotional. He accused the media of ruining his life. And yet he kept changing his story, each version darker than the last. Beth Holloway, meanwhile, refused to rest. She met daily with Aruban authorities, hired private investigators, and spoke directly to the press. "They're lying," she said. "They know what happened and someone is protecting them." Behind closed doors, even the police began to admit their frustration. They suspected Joran knew far more than he claimed. But every time they pushed, he shifted the narrative again, a dance of deceit that turned truth into fog. In late June, after weeks in custody, all three suspects were released for lack of evidence. The outrage was immediate. Beth stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by cameras, her voice trembling with fury. "They just let killers walk free," she said. "Where is my daughter?" To the world, it looked like a system protecting its own. To Beth, it was the confirmation of her worst fear. Not only had Natalee vanished, but so had justice. And as Joran van der Sloot walked out of custody, smiling, the island of Aruba began to lose something far more lasting than its reputation. It lost the truth. By the summer of 2005, the island of Aruba was no longer a tropical paradise. It was the epicenter of a global media storm. Dozens of news outlets camped outside the police headquarters. Satellite vans lined the narrow streets. Reporters shouted over each other, trying to capture any glimpse of the suspects. Every night, millions of Americans tuned in to watch Nancy Grace, Greta Van Susteren, and Anderson Cooper dissect every detail of the case. Natalee's disappearance had become a 24-hour news phenomenon, a perfect storm of mystery, tragedy, and emotion. The story wasn't just about a missing girl anymore. It had become a reflection of something larger, the clash between grief, justice, and the spectacle of fame. At the center of that spectacle was Joran van der Sloot. He wasn't just a suspect. He was now the villain America loved to hate. Footage of him walking out of police custody, smirking, unshaken, played on repeat across every major network. He became a symbol of arrogance and impunity. But Joran didn't hide. He gave interviews, he played games with the press. At one point, he went on Dutch television and offered yet another version of what happened that night, claiming Natalee collapsed on the beach, that he tried to help her, and that a friend took her away in a boat. Then, a week later, he recanted it all. To the world, it looked like manipulation. To Beth Holloway, it was torture. She returned to the United States but refused to stop fighting. She appeared on national television nearly every night, holding up her daughter's photo, her voice breaking but resolute. "I will never stop," she said. "I will not let him get away with this." In the US, public sentiment turned fiercely protective of Beth and deeply hostile toward Aruba. Tourists began cancelling trips. Politicians called for boycotts. The island's economy, heavily dependent on American visitors, started to suffer. Officials pleaded with the media to let the system work. But to millions of viewers, the system had already failed. The case had become a war of perception. Beth Holloway, the grieving mother, represented justice. Joran van der Sloot, the smooth, smiling suspect, represented deceit. And every headline, every interview, every photograph widened the gap between truth and narrative. In the chaos, something essential was lost. The focus on finding Natalee began to fade beneath the noise of anger, politics, and ratings. Her story had become everyone's story, but her voice was nowhere to be found. By the end of 2005, the investigation had stalled completely. The suspects were free, the leads were dry, and the island of Aruba, once bathed in sunlight, was now covered by the shadow of suspicion and guilt. What no one knew then was that Joran van der Sloot's story was far from over, because years later he would resurface, and this time the world would learn what kind of man he truly was. By 2010, 5 years had passed since Natalee Holloway vanished under the Caribbean sun. The island of Aruba had returned to its quiet rhythms. Tourists filled the beaches again. But for Beth Holloway, the world had never gone back to normal. Her daughter was still missing. Her questions were still unanswered. And the man she believed responsible, Joran van der Sloot, was free. In those 5 years, Joran became a drifter, traveling between the Netherlands, Thailand, and Peru. He gambled, lied, and scammed anyone who trusted him. Despite his notoriety, he used his charm to manipulate, pretending to be the victim of false accusations, profiting from the very story that destroyed Natalee's family. Then, in May 2010, something horrifying happened. Exactly 5 years to the day after Natalee's disappearance, another young woman was found dead. Stephanie Flores, a 21-year-old Peruvian student. Stephanie was discovered in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. She had been beaten and suffocated. Security cameras revealed her killer leaving the room just minutes after the attack. It was Joran van der Sloot. The date wasn't a coincidence. He had met Stephanie while gambling at a casino. After a night together, she discovered something on his laptop, files connected to Natalee's case. Moments later, she was dead. Joran fled across the border to Chile, but his arrogance finally betrayed him. Interpol agents caught him within days. When questioned, he confessed, then retracted, then confessed again. The same pattern of deceit that had haunted Aruba. But this time, there was no escape. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, security footage. This time, the world saw the real Joran, not the charming boy on television, but a remorseless predator. In 2012, a Peruvian court sentenced him to 28 years in prison for the murder of Stephanie Flores. And though he was behind bars, the ghosts of his past followed him. Beth Holloway traveled to Peru to confront him face to face. When they met, he stared at her coldly, emotionless. Beth later said, "I looked into his eyes, and I knew he had no soul." Even in prison, Joran continued to manipulate. He sold false confessions to journalists, demanded money for information, and repeatedly changed his story about Natalee's fate. Each lie reignited the pain. Each promise of truth ended in silence. But the Flores murder had done something the Holloway case never could. It proved what kind of man he was. And for the world, it confirmed what Beth had said all along, that the devil she met in Aruba was real. Still, even after his conviction, One question remained unanswered. Where was Natalee Holloway? Even with Joran van der Sloot imprisoned in Peru, Beth Holloway couldn't rest. She had spent years chasing clues across borders, confronting governments, and enduring false leads. But one thing remained unshaken, her belief that Joran knew exactly what happened to her daughter. In 2010, just before murdering Stephanie Flores, Joran had contacted Beth's lawyer with an offer. He said he would reveal the location of Natalee's body for a price. The demand was cold, transactional, and cruel. He wanted $250,000. Beth's family agreed to cooperate with the FBI to catch him in the act. Agents recorded calls, tracked bank transfers, and built an extortion case. Beth sent a $25,000 advance, wired to an account Joran controlled. In exchange, he sent her a map of where he claimed Natalee was buried, under the foundation of a house in Aruba. Investigators went there. They dug. There was nothing. Joran had lied again. He had sold a mother false hope for money. But this time, his arrogance became evidence. The FBI had everything on record: emails, voice calls, bank receipts. While Joran sat in a Peruvian prison awaiting trial for Stephanie's murder, American prosecutors in Alabama filed federal charges for extortion and wire fraud. It meant that someday, even after serving his sentence in Peru, the U.S. could bring him to justice. For Beth, it wasn't closure, but it was progress. She told reporters, "If I can't bring Natalee home, I will make sure he never walks free again." Years passed. And then, in 2023, an unexpected twist brought the case full circle. After years of denials and manipulation, Joran van der Sloot was temporarily extradited to the United States to face the FBI's charges. In a courtroom in Birmingham, Alabama, less than 10 miles from where Natalee grew up, the man who tormented her family for nearly 2 decades finally stood before American justice. During questioning, prosecutors demanded clarity. Where is Natalee Holloway? And this time, for the first time, Joran confessed. He claimed he had killed Natalee after she rejected his advances on the beach. He said he struck her, panicked, and dumped her body into the ocean. The confession was detailed, specific. Investigators believed it. Beth Holloway called it the end of a nightmare. He finally confessed, she said. "Natalee's story is over, but mine isn't. I'll keep fighting for other missing children, because I know what it's like to live without answers." In October 2023, Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to extortion and wire fraud, admitting he had lied to profit from a grieving family. He was sentenced to 20 years in U.S. prison, to be served after his Peruvian sentence. After 18 years of deception, manipulation, and pain, the truth had finally surfaced. Not justice in full, but a reckoning. 18 years. That's how long Beth Holloway carried the weight of her daughter's disappearance. A wound that never closed, a question that never stopped echoing. From 2005 to 2023, Natalee's name became part of American history, a symbol of vulnerability, injustice, and a mother's refusal to surrender. Every May 30th, Beth returned to the same place, standing by the sea, hands clasped, looking toward the horizon. For the rest of the world, it was a mystery. For her, it was a memory, frozen in time. In the years following Joran van der Sloot's imprisonment, Beth transformed her pain into purpose. She founded the International Safe Travels Foundation, advocating for safety awareness among young travelers. She visited schools and universities, telling Natalee's story not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. "Don't think it can't happen to you," she would say. "Natalee was smart, kind, cautious. Evil doesn't always look like a stranger." Her advocacy reached far beyond Alabama. Parents across America began having difficult conversations with their children about travel, trust, and danger. Airlines and travel agencies began implementing new safety briefings. The Holloway case had changed not just lives, but habits. Meanwhile, the media refused to let go. Documentaries, books, podcasts, and dramatizations kept the story alive. Each promised new answers, new theories, new clues. But beneath all the noise, There was only one truth that mattered. Natalee never came home. For some, the obsession became unhealthy. Online communities built entire timelines of her last hours, dissecting details that had long lost meaning. Every new discovery sparked waves of false hope, followed by the same heartbreak. The world wanted closure, but Beth learned something deeper. Closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. In 2023, after Joran's confession, Beth finally spoke publicly from Birmingham, Alabama. Her words were not of triumph, but of quiet strength. "This is the end of Natalee's case," she said, "but not the end of her story. Because her light, her laughter, her spirit, they didn't vanish in Aruba. They live on in everyone who refuses to forget her." Behind her, photographs of Natalee at 18, laughing, sunlit, carefree, played on a screen. It was a painful reminder of what was stolen, but also of what remained untouchable, the truth of who she was. For millions, the Holloway case became a cautionary tale about trust, privilege, and perception. But for Beth, it was never about the headlines. It was always about the same thing, finding peace for the daughter she still called her girl. In the end, the mystery of Aruba may never be fully solved, but the endurance of a mother's love proved something far greater than any confession. Evil can win battles, but it can't silence truth. When a story captures the world's attention for nearly 2 decades, it stops being just a case. It becomes a mirror. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway reflected who we are as a society, our compassion, our curiosity, and our obsession with tragedy. But her legacy also sparked transformation, legal, cultural, and deeply human. Before 2005, stories of missing Americans abroad were often isolated to local headlines. After Natalee, everything changed. Governments across the Caribbean and Latin America began reviewing how they handled foreign missing person cases. The U.S. State Department established new international travel safety protocols, requiring more transparency between nations. And for families in pain, Beth Holloway became more than a grieving mother. She became a voice, a symbol of relentless advocacy. Her foundation, the International Safe Travels Foundation, and later the Natalee Holloway Resource Center, created partnerships with embassies and universities to educate travelers on safety. Each seminar, each campaign, carried the same message: evil hides behind ordinary smiles. Natalee trusted the wrong person, Beth said, but her story will keep others safe. That's how she lives on. In schools across America, Natalee's name became part of awareness programs. Parents began to have new conversations about responsibility, travel, and safety abroad. Colleges added mandatory travel briefings for exchange students. The ripple effect was real. A tragedy turned into action. The media also learned lessons, though painfully. The Holloway case exposed the darker side of 24-hour coverage, where sensationalism often overshadowed truth. Networks faced criticism for exploiting pain for ratings. As a result, many began to reform their approach to crime reporting, focusing less on spectacle, more on sensitivity. For true crime journalism, Natalee's case became a turning point, a call for responsibility. But perhaps the most profound change wasn't political or procedural, it was emotional. Natalee's story humanized fear. It showed how quickly ordinary joy could transform into unthinkable loss. And in doing so, it connected millions of strangers, all united by empathy for one family's pain. Beth Holloway's strength became legendary. She appeared on television not as a victim, but as a warrior. Each time she spoke, she reminded the world that grief can be fuel. "You can destroy a life," she said, "but you can't destroy love." Her determination inspired documentaries, foundations, and entire movements advocating for women's safety and international justice reform. Even the phrase, "Remember Natalee," became a shorthand in travel communities, a warning and a promise. Today, nearly 2 decades later, her name still echoes, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a symbol of what was built from that loss. Natalee Holloway's legacy is not defined by her disappearance. It's defined by what her mother, her community, and the world did afterward. From the beaches of Aruba to the classrooms of Alabama, her story remains alive, whispered in every act of caution, empathy, and love. Aruba still shines beneath the same brilliant Caribbean sun. Tourists stroll along Palm Beach, laughter mixes with the sound of waves, and the island has long since tried to bury the ghosts of 2005. But some stories never fade. They live beneath the surface, just like the tide that hides what the eye can't see. For the locals, the name Natalee Holloway became a shadow, a symbol of both shame and sorrow. For Americans, it became a wound that never quite healed. And for Beth Holloway, it remains a reality that replays every morning she wakes up. Every mother keeps her child's memories, photos, letters, laughter, tucked away in small corners of her heart. Beth's corners, however, are filled with unanswered questions. Where exactly did it happen? Could she have been saved? Why did it take so long for the truth to come out? Even after Joran van der Sloot's confession, there are pieces of the puzzle missing. His words answered some questions, but not the one that matters most. Where is she now? Natalee's body was never found, her final resting place never known. And so, the mystery remains, suspended between fact and faith. But what truly endures is not the darkness. It's the light she left behind. In the years since her disappearance, Natalee's face has appeared in classrooms, on safety posters, in advocacy campaigns. Her story has protected countless travelers, inspired stronger international laws, and shown the world what a mother's will can accomplish. "I lost my daughter," Beth said once, "but I didn't lose her voice. I became it." And maybe that's what lies beneath the sun of Aruba. Not just the secrets of a vanished girl, but the enduring echo of love, stronger than evil. When we talk about Natalee Holloway, we don't just tell a story of loss, we tell a story of resilience. We tell a story about truth, fragile, buried, but never dead. We tell a story about how one life, stolen too soon, can still shine brighter than the lie that tried to erase it. Today, as the sun sets over those same turquoise waters, its reflection feels different. For some, it's just light. For others, it's a reminder that even in paradise, shadows exist. And within those shadows, the truth still waits to be found. Because the story of Natalee Holloway isn't over. It lives in every question that was never answered, and in every voice that refuses to stop asking. If Natalee's story moved you, don't let it end here. Every view, every share, every voice helps keep her memory alive and helps protect others from meeting the same fate. Subscribe to our channel and join us as we uncover the truth behind the world's most haunting mysteries. Because when we remember their names, we fight against forgetting. Natalee Holloway's light still shines, and with your help, it never has to fade. Like, comment, and share for Natalee, and for every voice still waiting to be heard.